In a world with increased negativity, division, and despair, how do we stay inspired? On this show, we explore the most profound life lessons from Burning Man, relationships, entrepreneurship, psychedelics, spirituality, travel, and more. Welcome to Stay Sparked. On today's show, we talked about communication and about creating safe spaces for people to resolve conflict. We talked about ask versus guess culture. We shared some tools on how we can better connect with the people that are important to us. I'm Halcyon. I'm here with Betsy and JANUS. They are friends that I've known for a long time. They are people who I go to when the world seems a little bit too crazy and too dark, and often have perspectives and experiences that get things back on track. So I'm excited to be talking with them today and together and with you and sharing our journeys. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Yay.
So we're going to start with a little bit of gratitude. So Betsy, what are you feeling grateful for in this moment?
Well, what's most present is I'm grateful for both of you. Longtime friends, and we've just seen each other grow and go through so much. And I'm just so grateful to get to be here in this conversation with you guys today.
Yay, welcome. JANUS.
I'm grateful for how do I say this? The benefits of life, like waking up to, a comfortable home in a comfortable bed, and on a beautiful day that's sunny and things like that. Like we're blessed to live in this situation, our own personal situations, that is really really positive, really beneficial. It helps us to be in a position to kind of thrive, really. And so that it's easy to lose sight of that. And so it's good to have like a morning meditation, or just a moment where you just are grateful for the circumstances that you wake up in, which I think anybody can do. But I think I'm feeling particularly blessed this morning to be experiencing that upon awakening. So yeah, I'm grateful for that.
Here. And I think a gratitude practice helps us to get to that headspace so much quicker. I was in a Uber yesterday, and my driver was a mid-40s man from Iraq who had lived in Turkey and was now living here. And as we spoke, I just became profoundly aware of the blessings of my life, and the things that I can find to complain about are just so small compared to the struggles of so many people around the world. And it's easy, if you don't practice that gratitude, to keep slipping into the negativity away from all the blessings. I am grateful in this moment for a video that I found 15 years old of my grandfather that I had not seen. And it's like a few weeks before he died, and he's talking about upon his death.
A video you hadn't seen yet.
I had not seen in about 12 years.
Oh, I see.
So it was like.
So it's so fresh. It's new for you.
Yes, it was. I didn't realize it was way back in my archives on YouTube. And he talks about he will rejoin the energetic essence of my grandmother in the fifth dimension. I said, well, do you think you'll see her? And he goes, her? No. Like, he basically said, post-death, we will be post-pronoun, post-gender, and he will meet her in the fifth dimension in that essence realm. And I was like, this guy was a Baptist minister, but upon his death, he was way beyond that in this metaphysical world. And I just was feeling so grateful for this perspective, even though I missed it when it happened. Like, when he said it and I was in the room, I didn't hear it. 15 years later, I was able to absorb this thing. So I'm super grateful for the opportunity to learn at any point.
Sure. That's a gift.
So today our topic is relationships, and specifically communication. And so lessons that we've learned, or maybe continue to learn, about how to be good listeners, good communicators, and things in the modern world that are maybe making that more or less difficult. Anything that is jumping out at you guys that we need to start with?
I will just start by saying I'm passionate about this because it feels like simple relational communication tools is something that is not really put in our early upbringing education. And it is vital and essential for our happiness and growth, especially because we are, accustomed to being married and have families and be in communities, and communication is such an important part of that. And so I love that we're getting to explore this topic because we're all learning and growing. And as much as I would have loved to learn some of this as a much younger age, I'm grateful to be learning now and have had some huge breakthroughs. And a lot of that is also from stumbling along the way. So I'm excited to dive into this topic so much because it's a game changer when we have tools.
I think what's so interesting is that so often we get caught up in the context of our conversations or our arguments, and we get so caught up in trying to prove our points or something, but we forget that the majority of an argument or a fight comes down to the communication differences. The most profound kind of self-help thing I think I've ever heard was like the first thing I ever heard, which was a Tony Robbins audio cassette. And he was talking about that with his first wife, that there was a point when they were having an argument in the kitchen and she started yelling and he left the room and closed the door. And she was thinking to herself, he walked away from me while I was speaking to him. How dare he? And he was in the other room going, she raised her voice at me. How dare she? And so they suddenly were in this like enraged at the other person because their communication styles that they had grown up with had totally different definitions of what was disrespectful. And then they got caught up in that. And the reason they fought was no longer even relevant. They just were like, and I was like, oh my gosh, how often am I interpreting someone's behavior in a way through my filter and totally not understanding theirs?
Yeah, that happens a lot. And yeah, and to both your points, it's proper communication or productive communication is rarely taught beyond the point where we're like toddlers, even if our parents are even like on point enough to be like, use your words to say what you want. Like that's like the first communication lesson we get, and often the last. Because after that point, I don't recall, getting any sort of education or classes like anywhere through school, not even in college, about proper communication or learning communication tools. So that this happens a lot where we're, as adults, we get caught up in the feeling and the emotions and our filters, our own specific filters, not being applicable to other people, even people that we're close to. So it's too easy to get caught up in the emotions and stuff and just lose sight of what the conflict is. And then another conflict is created on top of that. And yes, so having the tools is really essential and really probably one of the most important, if not the most important, skill that we can gain as human beings, like trying to relate to each other.
Absolutely. Yep. I actually was just reflecting a lot on this recently because without the tools, what I've seen happen and had direct experience with this just recently last week, without the tools to communicate something that doesn't feel good to us in an interpersonal relationship with a friend, for example, it can get suppressed and people won't speak up. We won't share our truth because we don't know how, or we're afraid that it will come off in a way that is hurtful to another person. And so we'll just sweep it under the rug or try and let it go. But that just becomes resentments, and that can get built up. And so recently I actually got together with a girlfriend who we had some distance over the pandemic. I had reached out to her multiple times and she just basically didn't respond to me, and she kind of just slowly distanced herself from me. And so I actually checked in with her and said, hey, if there's anything that I did to hurt you or something's going on, I would love to clear this and have a conversation with you. And so we created a safe space. We met somewhere neutral and we shared our clear intentions around why we were meeting. And I listened to her share with me some of the things that happened 8 or more years ago that she never told me. And if I would have known then, I would have drastically adjusted the way that I was interacting with her. But I didn't know at the time. And she didn't know at the time how to communicate with me. And so, the phrase that keeps coming up for me is, if we don't speak our truth, how can we expect the world to be a better place? And how can we have stronger relationships if we're withholding our truth? And so on that, I feel like it's also really valuable to learn how to create a safe place for people in our lives to be able to communicate to us, right? Because if we're going to be like the one who rages or defensive, or then it's not a safe place for our friends to call us out or to share how they're feeling.
That is so true. And I want to get a little bit back into how to create a safe space, because like what you described about the reason why we don't have these hard conversations is because we're afraid of the reaction. We're afraid of the other person being upset, the awkwardness. Maybe it's even we're afraid of a reaction that we learned as a kid. You know, our parents would yell. And so we're afraid that any conflict in the future, the person might react like that old thing happened. And so we're just afraid of that happening. And when we don't then have the space to release the pressure and have the communication, I think what often happens, and know that I'm guilty of this, is I don't speak it because I don't want the awkwardness. I don't speak it. I don't want awkwardness. And at some point, I then get enough anger in that I do speak it, but not from calm or love. I speak it from anger. And like, never say anything. And I go, yeah, well, you never do this. You never pick up. You always make me feel this way. It's like, wow.
Yeah, it's like,
really?
like a tea kettle.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. The scale's tipped because it's like grains of sand. Keep adding on, keep adding on, keep adding on, and eventually the scale tips. Yeah. And then, what else I've learned from this conversation I had with a friend is that those kinds of things can also contribute to addictive patterns. So, if we're bothered by something that somebody is doing or saying, but we don't let them know, or we want to just like avoid the awkwardness, avoid the conversation, avoid the conflict, then it's like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to go for a drink, or I'm just going to go eat a bunch of food, or I'm going to go distract myself in some sort of way. So that way I don't have to feel what I'm feeling. And that just is a vicious cycle.
Dude, that's such a crazy awareness if you can notice it. I recently, in my last relationship, read Russell Brand's book about addiction and how there's addiction in every part of your life, and realized that I have unhealthy habits with food. And I noticed I was in a relationship with my partner that started getting tense, and I noticed myself grab some chips and start just going. And I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that I ever did this, but I definitely, have these comforting behaviors that are totally unhealthy.
Yeah.
I'm like,
things to kind of like distract us from feeling.
So how did you instigate the conversation with your friend, and how did you bring it up in a way that was able for her to be receptive to it?
I did. And she actually mentioned in our conversation that was what helped her to feel she was safe to open. And it took me a while to be able to get to the courage to be able to ask for this conversation. But I really felt into my heart and how much she really meant to me. And I wasn't willing to just let our friendship just dissolve without ever knowing. And so I sent her a text that let her know I love you and I miss you. And I would love to have an opportunity to connect with you one-on-one. If there's anything that I have ever done to hurt you or offend you, I'm deeply sorry. And I would love to have a clearing if you were open to that. And that was the catalyst. And then in our process, she responded and was really grateful, and she was really kind. And she's come really far as well in the time that we were distanced. She had also been doing a lot of personal growth work and some coaching, and she's like sober for the last 3 years. And so, she was ready to be able to have these kinds of conversations as well. So that really contributed to our ability to have a high level conversation that's clear now. I feel so good and so grateful. We hugged and we cried and we shared. And so, I think that opening was really about saying, hey, I love you and I miss you. And I'd love to have a clearing if you were available for that.
I like that wording, have a clearing if you're available for it. I think that sometimes in the past, I've used the words like, I'd love to talk this out or figure this out or something like that. But that is almost confrontational. That's almost saying like, I want you to defend yourself and I want you to give me a chance to defend myself, which is like, that's not inviting. But I've said things like, I would love the opportunity to listen. If you want, I will simply listen and make sure that you can, help me understand, how I've done this to you, but not like, I want to feel better about this. So will you sit down with me so that I can feel better about this?
Yes, I think that's the key right there, is listening and really letting the other person know that we care about what they feel and what they have to say, and to really let them know that I just really want to better understand so I can show up more gracefully as a friend, more lovingly as a person in community or in relationship.
Yeah, I wanted to mention an experience I had with Betsy several years ago, where I knew we were going to be friends. It was we were in Italy and at Domenher, some intentional community up in the northern part, which is fascinating. But there was a large group of us, and at some point in the during the trip, I had made an assumption about Betsy, which I was not particularly conscious of, but I definitely made it. And it didn't take her long to kind of pull me aside and be like, hey, kind of made this assumption about, I don't know if you remember this, Betsy, but you kind of made this assumption about me. I kind of would like you to not do that, like moving forward. And it was confrontational, but it was so like matter of fact and to the point, which is something that I personally really appreciate. So I was like, oh yes, because letting somebody know where you stand with them is a real gift. And so getting that gift from Betsy, I was like, oh, absolutely, I hear you. Sorry, won't do that again. And moving forward, and completely, it wasn't any residual after thing. Everything was great after that. And that's when I knew, I was like, oh, she and I are going to be friends for a long time. So because I just, for one, I appreciate, and I think it's important to get to a place where somebody can express, just maybe not bluntly, because she did it in a very positive, that the energy around it was positive. But I was able to hear that because of her delivery, as opposed to her coming to me and be like, rah, 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 about this. And so she's like, hey, just matter of factly, it was really a prime example of nonviolent communication. Like this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm wanting. Can you give this to me? It was just bullet points. And I was like, yes, absolutely. That was really, I think, my first experience with nonviolent communication, and its effectiveness as well. I've been able to kind of use that myself ever since, to good results. Thanks, Betsy.
Thank you for sharing that so much. That had to been at least a decade ago. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, because NVC has been a major influencer, and it is a absolute game changer when we are communicating with other people, especially if there's something that's coming up. And I love that you said that after that conversation, it was just ease. There's no awkward. It's like, oh, hey, here's the thing. Just bring it out onto the table. Let's be with it. And the request has been met. And it's like, okay, all right, let's continue to move on. Yeah. Clear, done, moving on from this place of new and even deeper connection too.
Yeah, very much so.
That's that ability, or you said, not blunt communication, but super clear communication and a clear ask. There's there's this idea of ask versus guess culture, where until I realized this, I had no idea that those rude people around me just were askers and not guessers. Whereas guess culture, you use these cues and code and say things like, boy, it's sure getting late. But what you really mean is, I am getting tired and everyone needs to leave in the next few minutes. Yeah. But if you're an asker, someone says it's sure getting late, you're like, boy, it is. We should put some coffee on because this party is awesome. And you're like, and I witnessed a married couple over the weekend, and the woman was sick and under the weather, and the husband came home and was like, what are we doing for lunch? And she said, well, I just took a nap. And what she meant was, I'm sick, so you're going to have to pull your weight and make lunch, or figure something out. But she didn't say that. She just said, I just took a nap. And he was like, well, what's the, like, just kind of, I'm expecting you, like, you normally you make lunch, so what's for lunch? And she, I could hear in her voice, I'm a guesser, so I know this language. I pick up on people's feelings. He did not at all. And so I was able to talk to the woman later, said, are you open to some reflection on your communication with your husband? And let her know that, you are not giving him an opportunity to give you what you want. And so and there ends up being this kind of tension in your communication, because you're not allowing the person the opportunity to be a hero to you or to give you a gift. And I think often we do want an opportunity to be the good guys in the story, but sometimes we just need to be told how.
Mm-hmm.
That not to sidetrack too much, because it is about what you're talking about. But there's something I read by that Frida Kahlo wrote, the artist Frida Kahlo wrote, and she cited a list of things she wanted in a relationship, like I want to be adored, I want to be loved, I want you to ask me how my day is, I want you to know when I'm sick and what to do when I'm sick and how to make me laugh, and this, I want you to make me laugh, I want you to make me smile, I want all these things in a relationship. And at the end of it, there's a pretty healthy list of things that she wants in a relationship. And at the end, and she's like, but if I have to ask you for it, I don't want it anymore.
Right.
Okay.
Isn't that the thing?
Wow.
I want all these things, but I want you to do it because you want to do it, not because
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I told you to.
And I had such a gamut of emotions on reading that last phrase. I was like, well, how are you going to get it if you don't want it? But I completely see her point. I was like, well, I shouldn't have to ask you for that. I want you to know me, or want to know me enough so that you know what I want without me having to explicitly ask for it. And so I get both sides of it. It's like I shouldn't, I'm sick. I shouldn't have to tell you to like make lunch for yourself or pull your weight. The fact that I have to say it explicitly is kind of like a bummer. I get both sides of it. Ultimately, I fall on the side of like, use your words. Like if there's something that you want, don't leave it to the other person to read your mind or to pick up cues. It's like, yes, they should be able to pick up cues, but it's like, it's not, you're setting somebody up for failure, but it's like, just cut it off at the pass, cut off the conflict at the pass, before it even gets there. If there's something you want, ask for it. I'm very much an asker. I appreciate the people who are guessers. I get how they are that way and how they came to be that way or why they're that way. I see the validity in both sides of it. But I kind of default to, being an asker and, using nonviolent communication, for example, just as a way like, okay, if there's something you want from me, ask me. And the answer will be yes or no, but at least I know, as opposed to having me like, have to pick up on all these cues or whatever, which I'm fairly good at doing, but I'd rather, if we could just kind of avoid all that, I would appreciate that.
The directness.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And to have some compassion for your friend, when she said, I just took a nap, how many layers were underneath that? right? How many times did maybe her partner not recognize that she was sick, right? And maybe because she wasn't asking, or she was, maybe there was something underneath it. So I think that there is, so many layers, especially in marriage and communication. I think that that's a really important thing to consider, and being able to have effective communication, like how many layers are under the surface from years or decades of, process and drama and that sort of thing. And then the other piece too is around worthiness, right? How many people feel unworthy to ask for what it is that they need, and is that connected to the guessing or the fear of like just being direct and asking? Or, like I think this article you sent out was around like askers that just, hey, can I come stay at your place for a couple of weeks? Direct. And that presents an option for the person to say yes or no. But if the person that is receiving that is a guesser and they don't know how to say yes or no, it's just, there's an assumption, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do we present as an asker too, to a guesser, or not even knowing if this person's a guesser, that, hey, no is also okay.
Totally. I'm someone who, like, if you said, hey, can I get a ride to the airport tomorrow? I'd be like, oh, gosh, I do have a really important meeting and a dentist appointment, but I'm I can cancel those. Sure. Yeah, sure. I'm pick, whereas if I said no, that would have been acceptable, but I have such a hard time that I will take it upon my burden to say yes.
Yeah, right. I always try and include in, especially in text messages when asking directly, like I'll give an example of asking a client to adjust an hour difference or change the time. I always try to make sure, say, hey, just checking in to see if you have any flexibility to be able to move our appointment from 1 to 12. If not, no worries, we can keep our original appointment. Right?
And that's kind of how you can speak to an asker and a guesser, because you give the guesser an opportunity to, you've given them multiple pathways that allows them to not, take on the tension. I do that to a fault. Like, hey, I'm sure it's no big deal, but if you have an opportunity, but yeah, if someone gives me a chance to say no, without it hurting them or
Yeah.
it doesn't put the burden back on them, it really it's helpful for me.
Yeah.
I was thinking when Betsy said that was kind of like, that phrasing was like the best of both worlds. It was a very, very direct ask, but also gave a lot of leeway to a lot of leeway for an acceptable response to that.
The other thing to remember is that people have totally different brains, and I think that we're more and more clear now that we have different types of divergent spectrum ways of thinking and awareness, and so there are people who it feels like they are being super inconsiderate, but they are just not taking in a situation with the same kind of what your perspective is and my perspective in the same way. And so the man in this relationship, was an only child most of his life, just not thinking about other people's experiences so much. And so he doesn't have the same, it's not being inconsiderate, it's this lifetime and maybe even brain functioning of a more internal awareness of his own experience. And the other thing is that, with going back to what you said about when you're afraid of someone's response, because that's often the guesser's thing of like, I don't want to say no and have that person go, oh, okay, fine, or whatever. But there are people who, we get trained by one another in all of our relationships. We train people how we expect them to respond, how, what we're willing to take of theirs, what we're willing to stand for. And in talking with this woman, the husband had a tendency to kind of be pissy in his responses. And it's this lifetime, only childy kind of thing. And what he's learned over time is when he is snappy, people often go, okay, no problem,
or what you want. Yep.
And then over time, you're like, I don't want to deal with his snappiness. So I'm just going to just do this. And you have to be willing to have some awkwardness to get to a new behavior, which is that really difficult thing of what, when you said, hey, can we have this conversation? Can we? And I think it's even more difficult when you have long time relationships with people and to break a long time pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a tantrum, right? It's like,
yes,
if a little kid has a tantrum because it wants a lollipop, and then you're like, you don't want to hear it cry, you just give the lollipop, even though originally you said no, right? That's training the child to see that a tantrum is going to get it what it wants, right? And so maybe is that a patterning that your friend experienced? Well, I'm just going to be a little brat and I'm going to, be snappy, and then people just give me what I want. Right? Is that mirroring? Potentially.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that is
so many layers.
That's the first lesson that we learn as human beings. That's the first social interaction that we learn is a negative one, and that is manipulation. Like what you're saying, if I cry and make a scene, I'm going to get what I want. Oh, and we learn this at what, 5 months old, 6 months old. And a lot of people, like, we all go through that. We all experience that. We all learn that. And it's kind of our responsibility to kind of get past that. And you see, like, and many people do get past that. And there's a lot of people who don't. Like, that's a lesson, or that is a behavior that is still in there for a lot of people. But there's a lot of people do. I think most people, well, maybe half people, they outgrow that just naturally. And there's other people that have to work at it, and there's other people that never do. So, so it's a sense of, if somebody's looking to be a good communicator or to have good communication in their life, it's imperative to, first have the awareness of that, and then you have to, like, take the lead. And there's a bunch of ways to go about that. I feel, but it's important that we exercise some form of self-responsibility, and be like, if you're constantly finding like you're in conflict with your person, or even if it's like minor conflict, but it's like consistent in a relationship, friendship, what have you, once you have the awareness of it, I think you can take it upon yourself to be like, all right, how can this improve? What can I do to help improve this, as opposed to just being in that space of like discomfort. Like if you feel like you've got a snappy partner, it's like, okay, this person is this way. Now, how can I elevate our connection so that maybe this doesn't come up so much? Not take on the responsibility for other people's behavior, but adjusting your own behavior so that it never goes there for the other person, and they can, give them a chance to rise to the occasion with you. Yes. And it's, I think it's important to, not to be like, well, it's like something they have to, it's like their issue. They need to work on it. They need to improve on it. It's like, well, okay, there's a way I can show up that maybe doesn't trigger that in them, without trying to take the responsibility for their behavior away. You can just, your behavior can help somebody else's behavior.
Be the change.
Be the change. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So as we start to come to a close here, let's try to think of a tool or a lesson or a way to stay sparked in this realm. I'll start with, I've found that having a sign or a word or a gesture that allows the other person to know that you need a break from the conversation, that you are starting to get to a point where, like, I'm about to say, you always do this, so before that comes out, I've used the timeout. I've heard other people have, safe words. Mm-hmm. And the caveat of the other part of that that's super important is, when you say timeout, there has to be a clear understanding of when you return to the conversation. Mm-hmm. It can't be I don't ever want to talk about the fact that you never make lunch. It has to be, okay, in 24 hours, in that time, we're going to sit down and calmly say, hey, yesterday I was frustrated that you didn't recognize that I was sick. And I know that I didn't communicate it clearly, but moving forward, I will be better at asking for what I need And it would help for me if you would, hear that, maybe be aware of your tone when you respond to me so that I don't get frustrated by that. And then have the other person a chance to respond. But having I know for me, I can feel myself before I can communicate clearly what I need. So I can call it if I can do that.
That's regulating your nervous system.
Yeah.
That's it. That's knowing when the moment is, when all the endorphins and everything starts rushing through your body, and you need to take a breath. Yeah, it's regulating. Awesome. I have two really powerful tools that have absolutely shifted all of my relationships. And Janu spoke to two of them. One is the basic formula for nonviolent communication when addressing conflict. And that is the formula is: when I experience, it makes me feel an emotion because I value and a clear request. That is an absolute game changer. It is like one of the most valuable tools in my tool belt. So if those of you listening have not used that model, highly check it out. There's so much content out there about NVC as well. Tons of podcasts by Marshall Rosenberg and courses and wonderful things. And then the other one that Janus, you just brought through so beautifully is the questions that we ask ourselves in a process, right? You said, how can I shift my thinking? Or how can I learn from the reflection that this person is giving to me right now? Or how can I show up more effectively in this relationship? That question or those questions are way more powerful than, why does she always do that? Well, what's her problem? Why is he so annoying? Why is this always so hard? Right? The questions that we ask really do lead our focus and our consciousness in a direction. And so when we can effectively become aware of the questions that we're asking and frame them in a way that is going to support growth and evolution and connection, then that's what I want to be, the way that I want to be addressing my relationships, and see it always as opportunities to grow and to learn.
Yeah. And it again, I feel it comes down to, we have a lot of, agency within our relationships and within our friendships and such, that it's best to do it, as a co-creation, I feel. But there's a lot you can do just on your end to improve things when it comes to how you communicate with the world and to others in that world. There's just, if you give yourself a foundation of, like with the knowledge of things like nonviolent communication and like self-awareness and how you might come off or appear to others, and just act from that and go on that basis, I think there's a lot we can do as individuals to improve our experience of the world. So yeah, just taking responsibility for that, and not for others' behavior, but kind of just fine tuning your own behavior. The results are astounding, really, if you start putting it into practice.
Awesome. Well, it is such a joy to be starting and continuing these conversations with the two of you. It is an honor to be joined by you who are listening. Life is so much richer when we are reflecting to one another, and it is so much easier to stay sparked. Yes. So will you close us out with an affirmation, Betsy?
Yes, I would love to. An affirmation inspired by this conversation is, I am always learning and growing from my relationships. I am always evolving my communication in the highest and best ways. I show up in the best way for the people in my life. I think that one's it. That's it. I show up for the people in my life in the highest and best ways that I can. I show up for the people in my life in the highest and best ways that I can. I have healthy and thriving relationships. My communication is clear, graceful, is direct, is loving, is compassionate, and I'm always learning and growing. And so it is.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.